Okay, so we're at the top of the hour here. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Smitherman. Over here at Metric Insights. Again, I've got Marius Moscovici with me here today. Hi, Marius.
Hi, Mike. Hi, everyone.
So thanks for joining us again. Today, we're going to be looking at a topic related to sort of the cost of not doing BI governance well within your organization, talking about what that means and some of the sort of solutions to instigating better BI governance and how it may work for you. Housekeeping things, we are recording this, so we'll send out a link to the recording afterwards. Please go into the chat or Q&A window, enter any questions you have. We'll either answer them as we go through or get to them at the end. But with that, I'm going to pass it across to Marius to start, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mike. So let's talk about BI governance today. And I wanted to right off the bat, mention the fact that, when people think about BI governance, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind are things like, security, access and control, making sure that the row-level security and restricted data is not going out, etc. We're not going to talk a lot about that aspect of governance today. Instead, we're going to talk about the part of BI governance that really hits your pocketbook or the pocketbook of your organization, in that the absence of effective governance actually has a very high direct cost. And so we're going to talk about where that cost comes from, and show you with some sort of assumptions that are there, they're typical for what organizations see, how massive that impact can be on your organization. So we're going to look at 4 different areas, essentially, that impact costs. And the first part of the presentation is going to be kind of lay that out, identify kind of the key concepts behind it, and then later on, Mike is actually going to show you some of the ways in which you can solve for these, and those ways that you can effectively govern to avoid having wasted spending in these areas. So if we think about where is it if you don't have effective governance from a BI perspective, well, there's operational expenses that are directly attributed to that. So, for example, if you have duplicate reports, this happens in almost every organization of any size. Over time, multiple analysts are out there creating content. They're not necessarily aware of what other analysts are creating. There may be content that was created by analysts that have left the company, but it's still out there running. And when somebody goes in to create a new report, they'll naturally build it from scratch because they don't know that something already exists, but perhaps it's not granted. They're not granted access to it. So this is obviously a big wasted effort. Merely, if you think about it, just merely from the perspective of a DB resource consumption, if you're paying for Databricks or GCP or Snowflake, or any of these cloud-based databases, you're being metered for your usage. And so if you have duplicate reports or near duplicate reports, what that means is you're running double or triple the query load that you need to be able to answer particular questions. Another area of waste that can be addressed is obsolete reporting. And obsolete reporting here, I don't mean just things that nobody's using, but things that are potentially underutilized. Where maybe you have somebody who doesn't really need to be able to see a report all the time. They're very infrequent users of analytic, and yet they're using a dashboard that essentially is consuming lots of resources on the back end. And again, think here of not just the amount of resources required to serve that report by running the query, but also the resources that are required to get the data into those final staging tables against which the queries are run. So from both of those perspectives, there can be lots of inefficiency in the process. And then a third area of inefficiency is often around BI tool licenses, either not being used by users at all or being underutilized. A classic example of this, we've seen this in lots of retail environments where they'll provide all of their store associates a BI tool license so they can look at reporting. But in fact, they only want to see a very small amount of information very infrequently. They want to understand their inventory. They want to understand what's going on in their store. And maybe they're very infrequently use the system. And as a result, it's not a really good use of licensing for those folks. And there's also lots of other cases where people may be using a reporting tool once a month or once a quarter, and yet a license is being consumed for them. So that's all the operational expenses. In addition to that, kind of as an overlay on this, you've got labor expenses that are affected by poor governance, and that the largest of which is essentially analyst time, right? So if there are duplicate reports, or somebody created those reports, and that's wasted time that the analysts are spending, not starting from the right place, not reusing something that's already there, but recreating things from scratch, that just end up cluttering the environment and overusing database resources. Additionally, obviously obsolete reports, if data pipelining is maintained, if reports are being maintained and they're not really heavily utilized or utilized in a way that generates value, that's a problem. And then finally, if BI tool licenses are underutilized, that often means that what's happening is that lots of queries are coming to analysts to answer questions that people actually could self-service, but they're not doing so, and as a result, it's creating additional labor expenses additional load on the analyst time. So what does this mean? Let's look at a kind of hypothetical company here, and then kind of understand a little bit of the magnitude of that. So if imagine you've got an organization with about 15 BI analysts that are serving some 3,000 business users with reporting, right? And so take again maybe some of these BI analysts are in high cost markets, some are lower cost markets. On average is maybe about $50,000 per year, fully loaded. Then your total cost for an analyst team is about $750,000 a year. If you look at DB consumption, if you're an organization like this, typically at least $75,000 a month on database costs, whether you're using GCP or Databricks or a Snowflake. They're all reasonably expensive for lots and lots of reports across lots of users. So there you're looking at about maybe short of $1 million in costs. And then if you're giving all these business users BI tool licenses, you've got a great deal. You're only paying $200 a year for each of those. Then that's about $600,000 a year, right? So in this situation, however, you don't have effective governance. And what I mean by that is you've got your analysts building reports in a silo. They're not really, they don't have the tools to be able to easily determine whether the thing that they're building is a duplicate of something else. They're obsolete reports being maintained out there. They're running using resources, and they're duplicate reports not only created but out there for users to stumble across them, makes them inefficient on the user side. And there's also obviously inefficiency on the creation side. So for this organization that has a total out the door kind of costs of, let's say, $2.25 million a year, let's look at kind of what is the potential impact of being able to reduce some of these inefficiencies. Or another way to think of it is like, what are the savings that you could actually realize if you go from a poorly governed environment into a well-governed environment, right? So we'll break it up kind of by area. So starting with the duplicate reporting. So typically, if you look at, if you conservatively assume that in an organization that doesn't have a really effective governance, you only have about 10% of overlapping or duplicate reports, which, by the way, is a pretty small number. A lot of times there's much higher numbers in this. Then that alone represents kind of approximately $90,000 a year of cost of just operationally running those reports. So they've got multiple reports. They're both running. They're both consuming resources. That's creating double the cost for you in that area. So that's an example of that. If you're looking at obsolete reports, right, this is oftentimes an even bigger area of potential savings or waste, if you like, right? In that sense that there's, there may be as much as a quarter of your reports, if you look at them carefully, look at who's using them, how heavily they're being used, that you find that they're underutilized. They're not necessarily needed for that particular purpose. There's much easier, cheaper ways to deliver that content to users. They can receive a burst. They can receive just a high-level numbers. They don't actually need to run. And that can account for easily up to $250,000 of DB costs for doing that. And then there's BI tool licenses themselves, right? So even conservatively, if you assume only 20% of your users that have license today actually don't need them, if you manage the BI tool environment more effectively, then that's looking at over $100,000 of savings there, right? So in this example, You also have the labor expenses side of it. So if you think about these analysts working in this environment, creating duplicate reports, maintaining things that are not necessarily used, responding to user queries when really, for situations because the BI tool environment is not properly optimized. You've got there probably about 2 of those 15 FTEs are not spending their time effectively on average, right? So that means you could either remove them or you could keep that current staffing and increase what can be done by a significant amount with the same team, right? And that's on the labor side. So all in, it's pretty staggering, right? I mean, if you look at it, even with these sort of conservative assumptions, you're looking at potentially wasted costs in an ungoverned BI environment of over $500,000 a year, which in this case represents about a quarter of the total cost structure for the BI team. So certainly not insignificant, and certainly something that, it's a lot more than a few coins in between the silver cushions, right? It's something that really should motivate, I think, most organizations to take a hard look at how they do their BI governance and how to really be much more effective in this area. So with that, let's transition to a moment and have Mike kind of share with you some techniques that can be used to go from a poorly governed environment to a well-governed environment.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So let's take a look at some of the things on the metric insights side here from a platform capabilities perspective, and again addressing some of those cost areas and how you can start to identify some of these savings. So let's talk first about sort of the unused or underutilized reports. As Marius said, it's not just about finding stuff that isn't used anymore. It's about identifying things that are perhaps underutilized, where there's better ways of pushing information to people if they need it. So if we jump into sort of the metric insights view here, so what you're looking at here is, so I'm clicked on the unused tab at the top here, and in this demo environment, we're connected to a number of different data sources, obviously from a BI tool perspective, and I focused in here on Tableau and Power BI. So the first thing we're doing is plugging into instances of those technologies. On the left-hand side here, this tree structure is representing basically the organizational paradigm of content within those different instances. So in this case, we've got our prod version of Tableau. We've got a number of sites maybe on that Tableau instance, a number of projects maybe within those sites. And then, as you get down to the bottom of the tree, we're looking at the different workbooks and worksheets that are available on that instance. And what we're able to pick up initially is the usage of that content. And so by looking at usage in this case, over a number of days, 60, 90 days, whatever makes sense in your organization, we're able to sort of set a threshold that says if anything is lower than a certain amount, then we're going to flag those within the hierarchy as potentially unused content. Down the bottom here, so I'm selected in a particular project here, highlighting the unused reports within that particular project. Again, you've got a bit more detail here, as you're probably going to delve into whether these are things that are actually unused or underutilized and things that you can potentially get rid of. But obviously, you see the report name, when it was created, who's responsible for that particular report, the last time it was looked at, and who looked at it last time it was updated maybe, and then importantly sort of which users and groups potentially have access to that content. So it's who's this been shared with, even though it's not being used, so that I can delve into that. Maybe I can reach out to them, find out why they're not using it. We can also pick up the lineage for the content. So it's probably important to understand, where is the data coming from that's feeding this report? Is it from the correct tables, or is the fact this is obsolete because it's coming from old tables or views within the database? So what you're looking at here is in this case the Tableau workbook being fed by multiple tables or views coming, in this case, from different databases on the back end. So it gives me some context around, where that data is being sourced. So I know it's getting underutilized. I know who it's been shared with and who has access to it. I know where the data is coming from. If I consider that this is something that is a potentially obsolete report, then I can start to sort of assign that to someone to follow up on and make the decision. In this case, probably back to the person who created that report, if they're still with us, set them a task to go and check it out and see whether, again, it is something we can retire. So that's unused and obsolete content. Secondly, there's the concept of the duplicate reporting and overlapping reports. So again, in this view, you're looking again at the same data sources down the left-hand side, Tableau and Power BI with the organizational structure that we spoke about before. But obviously, in this case, we're looking for the potential duplicates. So essentially what we're doing is looking for clusters of reports that have overlapping criteria or characteristics, if you like. So what you're seeing here is in the tree at the top, I've selected what we've tagged as a main report. I'll explain that in a minute. But when I click on this, down the bottom, you'll see that it's highlighting a potential cluster of reports here. So each of these reports has overlapping characteristics with the main report. And again, we'll drill into that. And we've selected this one as the main report because it's the one either that has the most views, or if they don't have that many views, the most recently created one. And obviously I could go in and reassign what the main report is if I had more knowledge of this. But in this case, we picked this one because it seems to have the most views out of this particular cluster of reports. So again, I've got the report name, I've got when it was created, I've got who's responsible in this case for reviewing the report. We'll come back to that. I've got as we said about before, the number of views that particular reports within this cluster have been getting, and who again has access to it, or from a user or group perspective. So my task at this point, is either to assign this off to someone at a report level, or to go through and look at whether these are actually candidates for being duplicates and overlapping content. And there's a number of things that I can do with this. So if I select maybe a couple of these reports, I can obviously, log into them and compare them. So in this case, I selected two reports within the cluster, the main one on the left, and one that I'm going to try and figure out whether it's a duplicate or not. So it's logging into the reports. It's allowing me to view the live reports side by side and get sort of a visual representation of what's going on here. I can also start to compare the different metadata that we're basing this potential duplicate on. So this slide out on the right-hand side here, I've got, again, the main report in column 1 and the potential duplicate in column 2. And as we go down the page here, there's obviously different metadata that we're looking at. So there's sort of the contextual stuff around names and descriptions and who owns it, when it was created, the stuff that was in the table down the bottom here. I could go and look at the lineage again here, similar to what we saw on the unused reports. But then because we pick up that lineage and because we're connected to this content, these two tables, the first one is showing me column overlaps within the report itself. So this is the actual data within the workbook, in this case, within Tableau, of these two reports. And I can start to see that there's overlaps, there's slight overlaps in terms of the columns that are being used in these reports. So, sales rep attainment seems to be something that's showing here. I can see overlapping filters that may be within the reports. So in this case, the territory filter. So I've got a sense for the fact that it is actually showing some similar information within here. And if we go down the bottom, I've also got the overlap of the data that this report is being sourced from. So this sales analysis table, this sales summary table are the tables that these two reports are being based on in the lineage. And each of those as well has overlapping columns within it that are feeding the report. So rep name, territory name, quota, attainment are overlapping columns from the database that we're seeing within the report, even though they're coming from potentially different tables in this case. So again, from a columns in the report and a database perspective, we can start to get a sense for whether these two reports are sort of utilizing similar data or the same data within them. And then down the bottom, we've got more sort of the subjective type overlap. So this is looking at names and descriptions and tags that we've set up within the underlying tools for this content, pulling out key terms within that information to see again whether there's overlapping terms within the metadata that might again indicate it's showing similar things. So in this case, you can see again, terms that are in the name, the description, we've tagged it with certain metrics and regions, and again, there's an overlap within that particular content. So using this side panel, again, I can start to get a sense for whether this is something that is a potential overlap within our report cluster here. And obviously, similar to the unused reports, I could then go on and assign this to maybe the owner to say, take a look yourself, see whether this is something we could retire. Is there the possibility to combine these two reports together to solve both use cases if ultimately they're both being used? So with that as well, for those that have seen sort of demos of our platform in the past, you'll maybe remember that we have notification capabilities and emailing capabilities within them. We can use that within these workflows as well. So, overlapping ownership and responsibility onto what we've just looked at. Not relying on people to come in every day and check whether they have underutilized or duplicate reports. We can start to notify them with emails perhaps like this, where on a regular basis, if I'm building content within our organization, I can start to get alerts of any reports that perhaps are becoming obsolete or that perhaps are duplicates of other things out there. And again, be responsible for reviewing those and be accountable for tidying those up. The other thing on the duplicate side is really trying to sort of cut it off at the pass almost in terms of, as people are starting to create new content within the underlying tools, and as they initially sort of publish early versions of it or drafts of those reports, before they get too far into it, being able to sort of pick up the metadata as it gets created, and again, alert people of the fact that they're potentially starting to create something that is an overlap with another report in the organization. So in this case, simple example where we've got a report in Tableau and Power BI here. I'm starting to create this sales analysis report in Tableau, and it already has 90% overlap of metadata and terms with something else that is out there that someone has created in Power BI. So again, I may want to click into that and look at the details and just make sure that I'm not wasting my time here creating it. So that's from sort of the reporting perspective. So looking at, again, the catalog, if you like, of content out there and the different tools and technologies to almost tidy up what you have in place today that has sort of evolved over, I'm sure, many years within the organization to make sure, we can tidy that up and remove content that is consuming time and resource on the BI side. The second area that Marius spoke about is looking at it from a database consumption perspective, particularly if you're, again, using tools that are up in the cloud that are resource sort of priced, like Databricks or Snowflake or GCP. And it's a similar sort of UI and process with some added complexities, I would say. So the first is, again, back into this scenario now, but we're looking at tables rather than reports on the top left here. Again, we're looking in this case at the organizational paradigm of the different databases that we're connected to. So in this case, a Databricks instance that is feeding some of our BI content. And again, initially, we're interested in looking at underutilized or unused tables, particularly if they have a lot of volume. So if I've got small tables out there that aren't being used, that's probably not impacting my cost in a significant way. But in this case, anything maybe more than 1 million rows, I'm actually paying a fairly significant amount for. So I want to start to understand the utilization of those different tables. So I filtered it to more than 1 million rows. And in the middle here, again, I've got the different tables that meet that criteria. And again, we're looking at we're looking out for potentially unused content within those. So just go back to that for a minute. Similarly, on the duplicate side, looking for tables that have overlapping metadata and column structures. So, potentially containing the same information, even though they might be feeding different reports and dashboards. So that, again, we're not paying twice for what is effectively the same data and information. So again, we're highlighting potential database data table clusters here, where again we're looking at the main cluster, the main table, and potential duplicates within that cluster. When it was created, the last time it was updated, who owns that. In this case, down the right-hand side here, the amount of sort of reports and dashboards that are fed off of those tables. If I click into a particular table, in this case, the daily sales table that we've been looking at, I can obviously start to see the reports from a lineage perspective that are built off that particular table. Who owns those, the amount of views those reports are getting. So this ties into what we were looking at before on the report side. And again, who has access to that content, the lineage of it, if that's interesting to me. As we look at lineage of tables, though, so on the report side, we were saying, okay, what is feeding a particular report from a data perspective? As we look at sort of usage and potential duplicates from a table perspective, it becomes important to go a bit further up the lineage tree, if you like, to understand whether a table is being used. So just because a table, in this case, daily sales, may not be feeding a certain report, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's not being used. So we may have no reports built off of the orders table or the order line items table or the calendar table. But in this case, these tables are feeding the daily sales table, and that daily sales table is being used by a monthly sales summary report, and therefore it is actually being utilized and being used. So by looking at lineage, in this case, further up the hierarchy, which tables and ETL processes are feeding others. Again, as we look at a particular table, we can start to make the inference about whether it is actually being used and something that is actually being utilized at the BI level. Similarly to the report view that we were looking at, I can start to compare the tables to each other. In this case, obviously, it's mainly looking at the column overlap and again, the lineage of that information. So in this case, I've got two tables, sales analysis, sales summary, and I've got different columns in those tables named in a particular way with a particular type. And I'm seeing a significant amount of overlap within those columns, which is what's driving the potential duplicate flag that we see on the left-hand side there. And similarly with the reporting, I can now start to assign this out to different users. So if I infer that there's potential duplicate tables or unused tables within the hierarchy on the left, I probably want to assign those to people to do a deeper dive into and really understand whether this is something that we can retire or take out of our database and not be paying for updates to it. Final piece we want to touch on is, a lot of what we've been looking at is kind of the tidy up of existing environments. Again, for those that have seen our webinars on the rest of our product in the past, a big part of what we do then is about publishing the content from a BI perspective that's left into a centralized portal or catalog where people can consume it in a much easier way. Obviously, tidy up is typically not a one-time and done thing. So we want to have a way of going on and continuing to track usage and utilization and duplicates as we evolve as a BI team. So within the portal itself, once you've published content, we continue to track the usage of that. So which users are accessing which reports and dashboards on an ongoing basis. And kind of what you're looking at here is a summary view of that, where we can start to see content that is getting used and that's increasing with usage, but also that content that's sort of reaching its shelf life, it's decreasing in usage or ultimately not getting any views now within our environments. And obviously this then ties back into potentially these are either duplicate reports that aren't being used or unused content that ultimately I probably want to retire over time. Again, if I drill into this content, I can get to the details behind what's going on. So this is actually an animation when it's running in real time of different users accessing this particular sales analysis report that I've got selected here. What the visualization is showing me is over a period of, in this case, 120 days. Each of these dots is a user who's either looking at it once or twice and then sort of fading to the outside of the animation as they never look at it again, or there is a group of users in this case who are coming in most days to consume the content. So it's important to sort of understand those usage paradigms, how people are working with it, whether it's something that is still useful to the organization. So usage gives me that indication of whether, or one indication of whether a report is still relevant to the organization. The other thing we can set up is feedback on reports, so more of the sort of subjective type feedback from end users who are utilizing or not this content. So down the right-hand side, I can set up what we call report prompts, feedback prompts, where, again, either on an ongoing basis, I can have this pop up for users to request their feedback. They can, these feedback prompts can have scores associated with them or more subjective type feedback, sort of NPS type scoring, if you like. Or users can come in and manually, click on an icon and give some feedback if they have it. But over time, we can collect more subjective type feedback on the content as well. And if we look at a particular report, the two of those things gives me some perspective on whether, again, this is a report that we're interested in keeping, or in this case, something that perhaps has become obsolete because maybe we created a new version of it and that's what's being used, and ultimately we're not getting any usage anymore, and the feedback is more negative on this one because it's not required. So hopefully that gives you some sort of ideas around how those cost areas that Marius spoke about can start to realize themselves in terms of savings and areas that you can start to shed costs on, particularly on sort of the database. Well, both from an operational perspective and time and resource perspective for your analysts.
Thank you, Mike. So if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A area and we'll respond to them. I'm looking at questions that are there. There's a few things here. One is, do you need to publish the reports to the portal in order to take advantage of the sort of duplicate and unused sort of capabilities that we've demoed here? And the answer to that is no. In fact, the very idea, as Mike was showing it, is that you are oftentimes looking at content that has not yet been published to the portal, right? The portal is your governed environment. So all you need to do is connect to that Tableau instance or Power BI instance or what have you, so that we can collect the metadata, but you don't necessarily publish all those reports. And you can even actually think of this as the whole cleanup process as a pre-step to publishing the content, right? You want to rationalize your environment, make sure you're using resources correctly, make sure reports are correct, not duplicative, and then publish the good stuff to the portal. So this is a tool for that stage of the process.
Another question, Marius, about duplicates. Can you identify duplicates across data sources potentially? So if you have reports in different BI tools?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, and the idea there is that what we do is we are, maybe this actually touches on maybe a broader question I should answer, which is around lineage. Like, how do we show all that lineage information? Where does that come from? So we are collecting lineage from the BI tools themselves. So, from Tableau, from Power BI, we get the SQL or the semantic model information, and we're able to get the lineage there so that you can tell what report is using what tables. And then from the database itself, the databases all have logs. And so we mine that lineage as well from the log tables there so that then we can determine which tables in the database are being used, where tables are being built from, and so forth. And by stitching all that together, we can get an end-to-end a picture of lineage, and we can compare that across sources. So back to the question that you were saying, Mike, if you've got a Power BI data source that is using a particular table, a set of tables and columns, it's going to flag as a duplicate with a Tableau data source if there's enough of an overlap between the report columns that are being shown and or the lineage columns that are included. So you can look at that. And then we've got another question here. How is all the data content published? Do you use standard, collected? Do you use standard connectors, etc.? Right. So the answer to that is yes, we use APIs for the BI tools themselves. And then for purposes of the underlying metadata from within databases, there are APIs as well as in some cases there's database log tables that we can connect to. So they're all standardized mechanisms for that. There's nothing that you need to add to your existing BI tool stack to make the logging work. It just will work out of the box.
Good. So looks like they're all our questions. Final call. Keep an eye here. Good. Well, thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned before, this will go out as a recording available on our YouTube channel. We have another webinar coming up next week with a customer who's presenting on the BI portal concept. So look out for invites to that. But thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, Marius.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all for joining.